As a kid, it was always exciting to get mail. Just a big deal, right? I remember the house that I grew up in, for the most part, we had a kind of a weird driveway. It was shared with some other people, and so we were all the way at the very end. So to get to our mailbox, we had to make the walk. And I know every summer I would do that. While Mom and Dad were at work, I'd run up and check the mail. And most of the time there was nothing in there for me, but occasionally there was something there for me. And it was just always super exciting. And so today it's kind of the same thing, right? I still go out and check the mail, and while I'm looking through there, it's usually stuff for me or for Kim, but occasionally there will be something in there for Elizabeth or one of the other girls. And there was a point in their lives when, I'm just going to be honest, I would open their mail. They were just kids, right? And so, what was in there? Like, why is somebody trying to get a hold of my kid? So I would open it, and it was usually just junk mail or something like that. But, occasionally it might be a doctor bill or something that was supposed to come to me, but it ended up coming to one of the kids. But I would always make sure they got their mail, but it would be open when they got it. And of course, that was always a sense that I always liked Elizabeth in particular with some heartburn, right? And I had gone through her mail. And of course, I don't do that now, right? If they have mail, I leave it and let them open it themselves since they're all adults. But I think that sense of frustration is noteworthy, right? Because she saw that mail, and it was her mail. It had her name on it, not mine. And so technically, she should have been the only one worthy to open that mail because it was addressed to her. And again, I don't open their mail now because they're adults, but when I read through Revelation chapter 5, I'm kind of left with that same sense of what it means to open something because you are the only one worthy to open it because it has your name on it. And so in Revelation chapter 5, God has a scroll, a letter in his hand. And it's a good letter because in this letter it contains the rescue plan for all of God's good creation. And it's not a letter like we might imagine, right? Because this is an ancient document, and so it's not like there was a postal service or anything like that. But in the ancient world, instead of an envelope, you would have a scroll, and the scroll would typically be sealed and marked with some kind of a signet, and there may not have been a name on it, but you would know that because this scroll had a seal on it, only the person who is identified by that seal should be able to open the letter. And so in Revelation chapter 5, this is exactly what's going on. That God has a scroll containing his good plan to rescue his good world. And God's good rescue plan is not about evacuating all of his people out of this world and leaving this world behind to be destroyed. There's more to God's rescue plan than evacuating us so that we can go play, a harp on a cloud someday. Sorry, Lori, that may be heaven to you, but not for most of us. But that's not what God's good plan is, right? That's more Greek metaphysics than it is what we find out in Scripture. And so God's good plan, his rescue plan, is going somewhere. It has a telos. It has a design or a purpose. And the problem is that we see in Revelation 5 is that the plan has stalled out. That God has a rescue plan, but it's not going anywhere currently. And it's not going anywhere currently because some things have run off track. Now, we'll get to that in just a minute, but that's the story of Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter chapter 2 is that God begins to speak this world into existence, his good world, and he begins to give it order and purpose and design and function. That's what we see in the days of creation, right? There was evening and there was morning, day 1. Evening, morning, day 2. What we understand is that in the darkness there's chaos and disorder and confusion, and God brings light. There was darkness and there was light. There was disorder, now there's order. There was chaos, now there's function and design. And what we see in the way God creates is that God is setting up his good world to run and to be the way he wants it to be. And for whatever reason, God decides in those 2 opening chapters to partner with his creation, the humanity of his creation, and to allow them to complete creation with him. And he gives us dominion, and he gives us authority, and he gives us purpose and design. And we see it in the way Adam names the animals, right, who come to him. It's not just all these animals have no name, that Adam is giving them a purpose and a function and a design as well. That God and his human component are now together in this sacred space in the garden, and they are ruling and co-ruling his good creation and his good world. And all that sounds good up until we get to Genesis chapter 3. And in Genesis chapter 3, we see that there are powers at work who are out to supplant God's good creation, to bring havoc into God's good handiwork. And so, not to go over that story again, but we understand what happens in Genesis chapter 3 when the serpent shows up, and the serpent begins to question God's goodness, and to question God's handiwork, and to question God's purpose and design to move the story of creation along, and to partner with humanity, and to allow humanity to co-rule this good world with God. And so the serpent begins to question that. And what we see is that Adam and Eve, as representatives of humanity, abdicate to the serpent the power and the glory that was to be theirs. And so their position with God in the garden is lost, and they're set outside of the presence of God, and they're set outside of the presence of the garden, and they lose access to the tree of good and evil, or rather they lose access to the tree of life. And because they have no access to the tree of life, they begin the process of death. But God's not finished. And so God launches a rescue plan to rescue his creation through the same humans who helped destroy it. And he launches a rescue plan, and he does so by calling Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans. And he says, Abraham, if you'll leave behind everything that you know, and you'll listen to my word, and you'll follow me, I will bless you. I will reverse the curse of what happened in Genesis 3. And I will use you to begin to set the world right once again. I will bless all of the families of the world through you, Abraham, if you'll just do what I need you to do. And so these same humans that for some reason God puts so much trust in, these same humans through Abraham now begin to set the story right and to be the rescue for God's good world. But it doesn't take very long until we find that they themselves become part of the problem and not the solution. And they find themselves in Egypt, in bondage, and they're slaves, and they cry out to the same God once again that they need rescue. And God sends a deliverer, Moses, and through Moses and the 10 plagues, they walk through the Red Sea, and they are birthed as the nation of Israel. And so God once again starts the rescue plan with humans. time, it's not Abraham, it's the nation of Israel. And we find in just a few chapters that, again, the solution becomes part of the problem. And so now, we fast forward all the way through the rest of the Scripture, and we find ourselves in Revelation chapter 5. And we have this heavenly throne room that we started talking about last week. And all of the people who are gathered in this heavenly throne room, in this sacred space that John has entered in, he sees behind the veil and what's happening. And he looks, and he sees God, who still has this scroll in his hand that is descriptive of his will and purpose and design for the world. But the problem is the scroll is sealed, and nobody is worthy to open it. And God's not like me. He's not just going to open the mail himself. And so what we see then in Revelation chapter 5 is that now their response is just that they're all weeping. And they're tearful about what's happened. And so we're going to jump in and look at Revelation chapter 5, and we'll start here at verse 1. He says, "Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll written, and on the back sealed with 7 seals." Right? Again, as we just said, this is very descriptive of a letter in the ancient world. Maybe not the 7 seals portion, right? But nonetheless, a letter would be sealed and marked as an indicator that only a certain somebody has the permission to open this scroll. And of course, this scroll is God's good plan to rescue his creation. So look at what takes place next. And he says, "I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, 'Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?'" So they recognize that in this garden story, that fundamentally God's partner, God's co-regent, the ones he created in his image, jumped the story off the track. They also realized that the man Abraham that they called, and through Abraham's descendants, God would set the world right side up. They became part of the problem and not the solution. They also recognized that the next phase of the rescue plan was the nation of Israel. And we know now that also came with trouble and difficulty. And so now they're wondering, how is the story of God going to move forward? Maybe all hope is finally lost. And so there's no one worthy. No one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll and look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or look into it. And then one of the elders said to me, that would be from chapter 4 that we read last week, and one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." So in this heavenly throne room, one of the beings there decides, or recognizes, hey, there is somebody worthy to open the scroll. And he tells us who it is, right? It's the Lion from the tribe of Judah, the Root of David. He has conquered. And because he has, the story of God's creation, his rescue plan of his good world, can move ahead. Because he can open the scroll. He alone is worthy. What a wonderful way to see the story of Jesus. And what I want you to see this morning, we have much more to look at, but I want to say this because it's super important. That we sometimes flatten the story of Jesus out so much that we just see it like this, that God is a good and a holy and a righteous God, and that our sin really aggravates God to the point where his wrath and anger burns against it, and he is about ready to drop the hammer of his holiness and righteousness on you. But thank goodness Jesus stepped in and took that hit for you. And because he did, now you get to go to heaven when you die. Now listen, I'm not saying that that story is wrong. I'm saying it's incomplete. Because what we need to understand is that God's anger is not just burning against you, that his anger is burning because this world has fundamentally slipped into rebellion against its Creator. And there are powers and principalities in this world who want to oppose God's reign and rule and God's good purpose for you and me and the rest of his creation. And God has a rescue plan to set the world right. And when his creation aligns itself with the serpent, or the powers and principalities, or the beast, or whatever image you want to look at in the book of Revelation, God's angry over that. Because he has better for his creation than those things. And so God's judgment is against those powers and principalities. God's judgment is against those who would supplant the reign and rule of his good world. And God's judgment also will be against those who align themselves with those powers and principalities. And so it's not just a flat-out moral story. It's a story that says that God has better for this world. And that God's heart breaks when the widows and the orphans are mistreated. That God's heart breaks when the rich and the mighty and the powerful lord over the vulnerable in this world. That God's heart breaks when we abuse one another and we violate one another and we use our words to slander one another and we divide rather than unite. And then God's heart breaks when his world is full of anger and animosity and strife and division and sexual immorality and all of those other things. That all of that is a sign that we have aligned ourselves with the powers and principalities of this world who stand judged in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And now what we see in Revelation chapter 5 is that the story of God can move forward because there was a true human who showed up and who set the story back on track. And that the story of Jesus is not so much about us seeing and understanding that he is divine and a part of the Trinity or the Godhead or something. And that is true. We need to see that. But we also need to see that Jesus teaches us how to be human. That he teaches us how to live. And that Jesus sets forth a way and a pattern to be in this world so that we can align our lives with him in such a way that we pick up the mantle of who we were called to be in this world as well. You'll see that here in the next few verses. Look at verse 6. And then between the throne and the four living creatures and among the elders I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he went, and he took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp, and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song. And here's the song that they sang. Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals. For you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom of priests to our God, revealed as the one who's worthy to open the scrolls, and when he does, it isn't him we see as the only one coming in to rescue God's good world. Who else do we see? Us. A kingdom of priests. And a kingdom, not just of priests, but priests to our God, and priests who reign on the earth. This is very much the language of Exodus chapter 19, that when God's people were brought out of slavery and bondage out of Egypt, God collects them at the foot of Mount Sinai, and he gives Moses instruction, and he says, Moses, I want you to bring all of the people, man, woman, and child, bring them all to me, because I am going to make them all a kingdom of priests and believers. In other words, I'm going to reinstate them exactly to the position they had in Genesis 1 and 2. Because the story is going to move ahead. And so they get to the foot of the mountain, and what's the first thing that this newly rescued people does? What do? They create a calf out of gold, and they worship. And so the rescue plan stalls out once again. But in this case, there's something that has been dealt with that the law of Moses could never do. That in this case, these people are now open to the plan and the rescue story of God because something has been slain. And a blood sacrifice has been made. And it was through this Lamb who takes away the sin of the world. And now that this sin has been dealt with, this rebellion has been dealt with, the powers and principalities of this world stand condemned. And so we have a decision to make whether we want to align our lives with the powers and principalities of this world who are on their way out, but they promise us the security of wealth and riches and power and prestige. Or we can align ourselves with the story of the slain Lamb, who has offered himself as a sacrifice for the sin and rebellion of the world. And in that story, we can find ourselves to be the people of God once again, who are shaped as a kingdom of priests and believers. And what does that mean? It means that we collect the praise of all creation and the worship of all creation, and we give that as an offering to God. And we also reflect and image the characteristics and attributes of God to the broken world around us. And we stand as a testimony to the powers and principalities who will fall by the weight of their own wickedness. We are a rescued people, freed from the shackles of sin and bondage, restored to a life, mobilized against the powers destroying God's good world. So what does all that mean for you? Because I get it. This is tough stuff to hear. And it's hard to work through. And so I want to paint this picture for you where you begin to see the book of Revelation, and not get lost in all of the imagery, but to know and understand this story and how it unfolds, that God cares about his good world. That God cares about you and me. And he's going to rescue this world. And the Lamb has been the only one worthy, the only one who truly shows us what it means to be human. The only one who shows us what it means to truly live under the weight and the authority of the kingdom of God. So what does it mean to us? Well, it means that we should see the death, burial, and resurrection with more richness. And we should see it not in a way just to say, well, God was angry at me because I did some bad things. And because I did some bad things, God was going to do bad things to me. And so therefore, Jesus stepped in, took the hit, and now when I die, I get to go The story of what Revelation 4 and 5 is telling us is much more complex and beautiful than that. What Revelation 4 and 5 is telling us is that God so loved the world that he sent his Son, as Paul would say, to be the second Adam, to be the second source of humanity, for us to live in light of what it means to be truly human, to be a kingdom of priests, to be a kingdom of priests to our God, to worship him because he alone is worthy. He alone will defeat the powers and principalities of this world. He alone can defeat the serpent. He alone can defeat the beast that we're going to look at in the next couple of weeks. He alone can fight that battle. And so the question for us becomes a real simple one. That the powers and principalities in this world are defeated, but it's still a question of allegiance. Whose side are we on? Are we on the side of the Lamb or the side of the beast? Are we on the side of love and compassion and justice for God's good world, or do we find ourselves aligned with the injustice offered by the beast? And there's a coming battle and a conflict, because that kind of stuff has got to go out of God's good world. And the only thing that's going to remove it is not a tank, it's not a gun, it's not any of those kinds of things that we fight the wars of this world with. What's going to remove it is the proclamation that Jesus Christ is the rightful Lord over creation. That Jesus is the Lamb who was slain. That he is the one to open the scroll, to move the story of God forward. And we can align ourselves with that proclamation. That is what the gospel is about. The word gospel just simply means good news. And that when there was a new Caesar in Rome, there was a gospel proclamation that would go out to the rest of the world, and it would be something along these lines. There's a new Caesar in Rome. His name is Caesar so-and-so. He's going to come and visit you, and you have to make a choice. You can come out and greet him as he comes into the city, and you can pledge your allegiance to him, or you can stay behind. And if you stay behind and try to just build up a wall to keep Caesar out, just know that's not going to work out very well for you in the long run. Because there's no greater army or force in this world than Caesar. And so when the gospel is proclaimed, that's essentially what the gospel is telling us. Is that there is a new Caesar, a new authority in town, and his name is Jesus. And you owe him your allegiance. And so therefore, our proclamation is very simple, that the Lord is returning. And he is going to come to his creation once again, and you have to decide what side of the fence do you want to be on. Are you going to be part of the party who comes out and who welcomes the rightful Lord over creation? Are you going to welcome him in? Are you going to celebrate his reign and rule and authority? Or are you going to side with the powers and principalities of this world and be entrenched and fight a battle that's not going to go your way? That's gospel. That's the story Revelation is telling us. Make your choice accordingly.